Okay, I got it. So now let me start again. Today we're talking about residential real estate investment. And then it's actually how I got into real estate initially. I was working as a CPA when I had a very entrepreneurial custodian that worked in my office. And I was working late one night, as I do during tax season. And she started talking to me about the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I don't know if any of you have read it. It's really good. And it got me thinking like, oh, I could do that. So I talked my husband into purchasing a duplex. It was before kids. It was a good way to like cut my teeth. You know, we removed wallpaper. There was 2 layers of carpet, you know, all of that good stuff. It was, so I don't know, renovate is too strong a word, but we made it look nicer, cleaner, rented it out, kind of muddled our way through, made a lot of mistakes, but did, you know, a couple things right. So what I like about residential real estate investing is even if you do a couple things like wrong, it's very forgiving because it's the long term. When I ended up selling, so I bought that duplex, it probably was 2000, I'm going to call it 2, somewhere right in there. Sold it, made decent money on it, even though I didn't do everything right. Ended up buying a 4-plex over in Belknap Lookout. I kind of was hearing little rumblings about some, you know, development that would be going on there. And now we see it, right? Like a lot of medical housing, a lot of things there in Belknap, you know, just north of the hospital. But when I bought, it was right before the crash. It was like 2005. And then I bought another one over on Clancy. And I was waiting for all this development to happen. And then what happened instead is our market in world crashed. It was a really interesting time to be a property manager because, well, especially that neighborhood was a little rough. Dawn, I see you on here. I know you had some in that neighborhood, so you can you can attest to what I'm saying. You know, I had one client that I had to evict for, you know, being a crackhead and whatever. So that was fun. I got to know the policeman. And I'm not telling you this story to scare you about property management because it just kind of, to a certain degree, it comes with the territory. But luckily, there are lots of people that do property management. So if that's not something you have stomach for, like eviction is hard. And I'll tell you, this was the hardest thing I ever did, is I had a gal who had lived in my duplex for a while, had a really nice boyfriend, couple kids with him. She ended up dumping him for her drug dealer and never paid rent again after she did that. So I had to evict her and her 2 little kids. And she didn't move, and I had to go with the sheriff and put all her stuff at the curb, and she was still living there. And her kids watched me put all their toys at the street. That was the worst thing I've ever had to do. That was so heart-wrenching because they're asking me, what are you doing? And I'd say, go talk to your mom. But that's not a typical experience. It's certainly not every day. It's one of those, oh yeah, I had mice kicking the door. Yeah, it's one of those things. And I guess I'm telling you this story up front because I still love investment, even though I had that experience. Because I've also had a lot of really nice tenants. Those are the ones you don't get to know as well because you just don't hear from them as often. But I've had a lot of great people that I've been able to develop relationships with. Just as I'm talking to a fellow realtors here, I've sold houses to a lot of my tenants because you develop relationships with them. Oh yeah. Yeah, Dawn says she had to do that too in Belknap. We were really close to each other. And then I had a developer buy, especially my one on Clancy was probably the worst part of the street. and had a developer buy it and did really well on that property. I could have done better because he called me, wanted to buy it, and I didn't even bother returning his call. I wasn't interested. Finally, he got a hold of me because he wouldn't stop calling, and I was like, well, you'd have to make it worth my while, you know? And I gave him a price that I thought, I guess I'd do that. And he was like, okay. I was like, doggone it. I should have gone higher, for crying out loud. But, you know, it was the price that I told him I'd be happy with, so I can't go back on that. And I was happy. Coit I still own. And I mean, it's been however many years later, 2005 to now, but I figure I have about 100,000 in equity in it now. So even though it had its ups and downs, you make money by just sticking with it. That's what's so powerful about this, is the longer you hold it, the more profitable it gets. So it's the long game. If you're trying to really make money overnight, flipping is going to be the way you do it. But that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is buying and holding, building cash flow, and building wealth. And all of those things happen over time. So I do have kind of an outline now that I told you like little snippets of my story. I do have an outline that before I jump in, I'll just to kind of fill in the blanks with my story. I'm not a mogul by any means. I have this 4-unit. I do own my office, and there's a residential apartment up above it. So it's kind of commercial, but I don't know. That's where you hire a realtor, because I was my own realtor in commercial and I kind of screwed it up a little bit, but all's well that ends well. Then I have a single family in Alger Heights. I have a single family on Alpine, and I have a duplex in Muskegon. Muskegon is a great place to go for cash flow, although there's a lot of deferred maintenance in that area. So just things to look out for. So like I said, I don't have like a million, but I have enough where I feel like I'm going to be able to retire pretty comfortably. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to have a million to do pretty well from it. I did have a property manager for, I'd say 12 of those 15 years. I just started managing my own again, which has been kind of an adventure because it's different now. A lot of people pay me Venmo. They didn't used to do that. You know what I mean? But there's a lot of fundamentals that are still there. You're still working with people, and it's been a good thing. So I guess now it's going to be a little bit of education, and it's probably going to feel a little bit like a sales job because I love it so much. I really believe in it. I hope that at the end of this that you all say, man, I should buy one too. And like anything, you think, well, I should have done this 20 years ago, but it's like, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. So start today. Okay. So why the heck do I believe in it so strongly? One is your tenant builds equity for you. Even if you're not really cash flowing, you're still gaining equity every month just by making your payment. With all of my properties, I round up. So I pay a little bit extra on all of them, and it's not a lot. I don't feel it, but yet I gain that much more equity every month. And over time, little things accumulate over time, right? And that's kind of the name of the game in this. But you don't even have to pay extra. Just by making your payment, you're gaining equity every month. And this is another one of those things where the longer you hold it, the more profitable it becomes. Anybody that's seen an amortization schedule knows that in the beginning, you're not paying very much towards principal, but that becomes more and more and more and more over time. So holding them really adds a lot of forgiveness for any mistakes that might come along the way. The other thing is you get the benefit of increasing in value. What's kind of great about that, and I'll show you some examples here in a minute of actual numbers, but what's kind of great about that equity is, say you buy something for 100,000, just for a nice, easy round number, and you put 20% down, so 20,000, and let's say it goes up 2%, and you just gained 2,000, right? But you only put down 20. So really your return is 10%, not 2%, because you are making appreciation on the bank's money. Now, obviously you're making a payment, or your tenant is in any case, but that's the power of leverage. Now, all of us that lived through the crash knows that leverage works both ways. And like my property on Coit that I keep talking about, my 4-unit, during that crash, I thought I was the biggest idiot ever, because I heard all these rumors about development, and I thought it was going to happen in the next couple of years, and it ended up being 10. But I didn't lose money for real. I lost money on paper. I just held on, and I ended up doing really well on it. So there's my encouragement to you. And if you buy it right, and as time goes on, this gets better and better, you cash flow. So besides just the passive things that are going, you know, or maybe not passive, but the non-liquid increase in wealth, there also is cash flow, and it gets better and better over time, because your payment doesn't typically go up, maybe a tiny bit, but rents go up and your payment doesn't. So that gets better and better over time the longer you hold things. The other reason is because of property taxes. We all know about uncapping. So when you first buy it, that's the highest your taxes are going to be, and it doesn't keep pace. Meaning your property taxes don't go up at the same rate that your value does typically. So there becomes this higher, bigger and bigger disparity. Yeah, I see a hand, which is cool. Feel free to, if you have a question, feel free to either unmute yourself or put it over on the chat. But yeah, please state your question if you have one. But, and then of course there's tax advantages. That's the other reason I'm a big believer, and we'll get a little bit more into that. Some things that you probably know about, and maybe some that you don't. No, that's okay. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen. I have a little spreadsheet that I think is going to help explain some numbers, and that it's actually kind of cool to do this webinar via Zoom versus in person, because I can actually show you my spreadsheet much more easily. I'm going to try to walk you through some numbers, and I think that'll explain a little bit better here some of the valuation models that people use. Because whether you're doing, can everybody see that okay? One consequence of sharing my screen this way is I no longer have my little participant thing over on the side. So if you have a question, you have to unmute yourself until I stop sharing my Excel sheet, because I'm not seeing the little chat right now. So, but please feel free to do that. Go ahead and unmute yourself anytime. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. But this is a tool that I use, and it's actually, we're going to post this Excel sheet into Clarity Conversations afterwards. So if you're not, that's a Facebook group. If you're not a member of that, go ahead and join. And that's how you can access this after the fact. Just to make it clear, this is kind of an old CPA trick when I used to use Excel all the time. Everything that's in yellow is where you would actually input data. Everything white, everything else is formula driven. So this is a pretty good evaluation tool. It covers a lot of the different valuation models. It's called an APOD, Annual Property Operating Data. And it helps you to just kind of evaluate for yourself or for an investor to just look at what is this thing worth? Am I going to be positive or negative cash flow? And sometimes you don't know because repairs come up. But we want to build some of that in. So I'll just talk you through this sheet, and I think it'll get you inside my head as far as how you evaluate these things and how you use them differently in different situations. So just to kind of start at the top here, purchase price, and then looking at rent. Obviously, this is just set up for a duplex. If you have more units than that, just go ahead and, you know, add some rows. And it is set up for a sum. So if you add them in the middle of rent 1 and 2, it should add it together. But obviously you want to double check that the formulas work correctly if you add rows. But in any case, you'll notice that it's about 1% of the purchase price. That is my really quick thumb to the wind way to know, am I in the right price range? That tends to be kind of the break even type of, now obviously there's a lot of assumptions that can change if that is the right number or not. Just even something like, do the tenants pay the utilities or does the owner pay it, has a huge impact on cash flow. So this is merely thumb to the wind. But if you're looking at 6 different ones and you're trying to look at rent to purchase price, that's a really good quick and dirty indicator if things are priced where they should be. Now this 1% can vary widely. It's not going to be 1% if you're in here to chill. If you're in someplace that's maybe a little higher crime, it's going to be way higher than that. Part of the reason is, well, some of those higher crime areas can be a little bit higher cash flow, but you tend to have a little bit more, let's just call it hassle factor. You do a little bit more eviction in poverty areas. And then this here, this vacancy loss. I set it to be 1 month. But I have a couple single family houses that they've all been there for several years. So that number it's not like every year you have 1 month of vacancy loss, but I tend to build that in. And then I just it really does kind of vary by area to a certain degree if people tend to move on more quickly or not. So depending on just the area and the type of building, the type of tenant that tends to be there, I'll adjust that vacancy loss assumption up or down. But you hope that you don't have more. I mean, you put people in for a 12-month lease typically. So hopefully it's not higher than that too much, but you know, sometimes it happens where on average, maybe you do have a bunch of people stay for 2 years, but you had that one guy that didn't pay, then you had to evict him, and it dragged out and blah, blah. So maybe for that one unit, it ended up being a higher than normal vacancy loss. But that seems to be a good average. If any of you, I know that there's a few on here that have some experience in property management. If any of you see something that's different than what I'm saying, or maybe supplemental to what I'm saying, please feel free to chime in, like what you experience for vacancy loss, for example. It'd be great to hear that. So then expenses, homeowners insurance, again, it depends. It's gonna really vary depending on the type of property, how old the property is, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just kind of picking a number basically. That's maybe a little on the high side for a duplex, but maybe not if it's a super old one, I don't know. Management fees, maybe you think to yourself, why are you building in management fees? They're going to manage it themselves, or I'm going to manage it myself. You want to get paid for that. I think either way, if the numbers don't make sense unless you do everything yourself, you know, it might not be the right one. Maybe it is, but then go into it knowing that you're going to be working for free. Property taxes, obviously we get that. I always look that up. And then what I do is I look up the assessed value and times it by the millage rate. Hopefully everybody, there is a link. Yeah, maybe I could post that too. I'll make a note. On the state website, where you can project out what your property taxes will be based on the municipality and the school district that you're in. So I always look at, once it's uncapped, what are my property taxes going to be versus what did the guy before me, what was he paying? Because it really depends on how big of a difference that is between the assessed value and the taxable value. Trash, depends if you pay that on their behalf or not. Repairs. The older the home, the more I build in for annual repairs budget. That might not be enough. It might be way more than enough. It just really depends on what's going on. But always be putting a little bit aside, because every now and again you need a roof or something big ticket. That's where, as much as I believe in investment real estate, that's where it's not a blessing, is if you have a furnace go out, you have a roof that needs replacing, and you just don't have the financial means to do it. You do have to have some financial stability to just, I mean, even if you do have to do that, it's fine. It still works out in the long run, but you don't want the short run to just boot, you know, to cut you off, or to be catastrophic for you, I guess, because of a short-term thing. So just make sure that you can handle these repairs. And I like to have just a separate account where I do keep money set aside for repairs, so that if something comes up, that I don't have to say, oh, sorry about that leaking roof. I hope that you have enough buckets to handle it because I don't have money for a roof. Like, that's not okay. Lawn care, again, it depends. If you have a single family home, you can usually have the tenants do it. If it's multifamily, it's harder. Often you can get one of the tenants to kind of step up and say, hey, I'll give you some money, or take some money off your rent. But even so, you should budget that in. Somebody's going to do it at some point. It's going to be you, them, lawn care guy. Either way, in any case, you're paying for it one way or the other, through sweat or through money. Different property managers charge differently for placing new tenants, but it's usually not included in just their, so property managers tend to take, they're all different, obviously. There's no set prices in anything in life, but 10% of monthly rent and then half of first month's rent seems like a typical thing that I've seen. Again, sorry, I can't see my little chat right now, but if you've experienced different things, feel free to chime in. Utilities, in this one, apparently they have split utilities. That's something that's important to be looking out for when you're evaluating which property to buy. I'm always looking at off-street parking. Like, my one on Coit does not have off-street parking, and it's pain. That's one regret that I have. I wish I had at least a driveway, for crying out loud. And I'm looking at split utilities. Even if I do pay, like sometimes, especially if they're Section 8, which I won't presume that you know, Section 8 is when the tenant gets government subsidies to cover their rent. A Section 8 tenant tends to be one that you would build in the utilities for them, because they'll pay it. You know, Section 8 will pay it if it's built in like that sometimes, depends on the situation for that tenant. But even so, it's really good to know how much for each unit. I prefer the utilities to be split. But having said that, if the property makes sense, it can be costly to split it out, just depending on what needs to be done. So sometimes it still makes sense even without that, but just make sure you're budgeting for utilities, if it's not split out, go way higher than what you spend on your own house. And because that's just how it goes. When you don't pay your own utilities, you use more of them. That's just human nature. So that's my tip for the day. There we go. Debt service is based on 20% down. We'll get a little bit more into how financing for rental properties is a little different, but 20% down tends to be a minimum. If it's more than 2 units, it can be like 25% down. So just be prepared for that. So here's the evaluation models. So this part up here is like a total picture annually. This here is monthly. And you'll see that I'm looking at monthly cash flow of $400, but annual cash flow of $700, and that doesn't make any sense, right? Well, it's because you don't incur all these expenses every month, like repairs. So this is just kind of a quick thumbnail of, well, how would I do, if everything goes perfectly, I don't have any vacancy, I don't have any repairs, the phones are not ringing at all, just people are paying rent, and I paid my mortgage, and I paid whatever utilities I'm responsible for, how are things going? What's the potential of the property if everything's going exactly right? That's what this is. Then over here, so that's kind of, I guess, the difference between constant and variable expenses. The variable expenses are the ones that get you. So I always try to estimate high, especially obviously for myself, because that's the risk that you're taking. Like my one in Muskegon that I bought, I still have a lot of high hopes for it. It's not too far from the lake. That area has been getting better, et cetera, et cetera. I knew I was going to have to redo some of the electrical. As it turns out, my basement is wet. So electrical is going to have to wait. And that's just kind of the stuff that pops up. You got to build that stuff in. It just happens. That's life. If you can't handle life, then you shouldn't be in property management. But if you can, you absolutely should. There's my point for the day in a nutshell. So evaluation models, there's a lot of different ways. We don't necessarily always use these models in residential and commercial. It's more typical, but I want to make sure that we talk about the cap rate or capitalization rate is what that's short for. That's this over here. When we look at income versus expense, and that gives us EBITDA, which that's kind of a business valuation term. It's earnings before income taxes. Well, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So taking out, because you're more, this is kind of like a level the playing field kind of calculation, because this guy might put down 50%, this guy might put down 20%. So obviously they're going to have different cash flow models. But if you take debt out of the equation, what are we looking at for a return? So for this property, you look at the EBITDA comparative to the purchase price, and that gives us a cap rate of just shy of 6%, which is like good, but not great. But I have one other thing I want to show you that makes it look a little bit better. We'll get to that in one moment. The other thing I like to look at, and every investor thinks differently about these depending on their goals and how long-term or short-term they are. Because the other thing that—
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
On the EBITDA,
Yeah.
how did you figure the amortization rate?
You don't figure it out for that.
How did you get? Okay, so you just basically added up your.
So this EBITDA is just
okay.
your rent income. So that's from here. and then your annual expenses, but excluding your debt service. So it's before depreciation, it's before amortization, it's before any taxes you'd pay, and it's before any interest you'd pay. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. Okay. Gotcha. Yep. Got confused there for a minute. Totally. Yep.
No, I'm glad that you asked. I think that
Perfect.
is kind of like a weird one in a way.
Yeah. I got confused. So.
Well, and for good reason, because it's there because they're trying to not make it a personal evaluation, but most people are trying to evaluate what would the return be for me. This is more of like a valuation model. If I took out things that make it personal, like what's your debt, what's your interest rate, how does this property compare to another one, what's the cap rate? So that's what. So in a way, it's almost, I don't want to say intentionally confusing, but it's not necessarily the model that we would use with a specific investor. Then we're looking here at the cash on cash return. So if we're putting down 20%, that's 30,000. I'm going to presume that we're paying our own closing costs. I don't know, they might be higher than that, lower than that, who knows, depends when you're closing, but I'm just picking a number. Let's say it needs $5,000 worth of repairs up front. And it looks like we're gonna cash flow at about a whole $700 a year. So the cash on cash return, again, is not awesome, but it is positive, so that at least is good. But one thing that does get me excited, and why I think if you can hold things long term, it has a really good, and then I'll stop sharing my screen here, but I have these, and again, you'll get this Excel sheet in Clarity Conversations if you want to download this for yourself. I have a little amortization schedule here, so it shows every month of your payment how much is going to interest and how much is going to principal. And I also added a little column here. If we're saying that the market for investment properties is going up 2% a year, which, you know, depends on the year, obviously. It's not going to be like this model is kind of presuming that it's 2% every year, no matter what. And obviously that's not how things go. Sometimes it's going to be 5 and sometimes it's going to be 0. Everybody that lived through the crash knows that sometimes it's negative, but let's just say overall in the long term, it goes up 2% per year. You hope lately it's been better than that, but we'll see. I was trying to make that a conservative number to just kind of show you. If you start with something that presumably you paid what it's worth, sometimes you get a hot deal, so you're starting even better than this, but let's just say you paid what it's worth. There's your mortgage. You have about 30,000 equity. You put more than that into it because you had some upfront repairs and you had to do closing costs. That's how you were in the beginning. At the end of year 1, though, you are $5,000 to the better of that. And that's about, and because that's a combination of your cash flow, the reduction of your principal through just making your payments, minimum payments, and that 2% increase in the value of the property actually translates to a 13% return. That's much better you can get in the stock market. This is kind of why I believe in it, because you manage it yourself. That's like a pro and a con, right? It's riskier for you because it's just you. It's not buying a stock where there's thousands of shareholders, and if something happens, it's just not as catastrophic for probably you personally. Versus here, if it needs a roof, you're the one replacing the roof. So there is more risk, but you also control a lot more. Presumably, you know how old the roof is when you buy the property. You have the opportunity to screen the tenants yourself, and not that a bad one doesn't get past you here and there, but you have some control in how you run this business. So I think 13 might even be conservative, because if you remember, it's not cash flowing super well, although it is positive, and it's just 2% is an increase in value. So if any of those things were conservative, let's say you cash flow 1,000 instead of 700 or 2,000 or 3,000, all of a sudden you have a pretty different percent return staring back at you. So that's why I get really excited about investment property. It has served me really, really well. Almost everything that I own now I've had for several years. One of my greatest success stories, and I'll just quick tell you this one. I had a listing and it wasn't selling. It was right on Alpine. It felt like maybe it needed a roof, but it didn't. It wasn't that old of a roof, but it was a little wavy enough to where it scared off potential buyers, because of where it was, it tended to be like first time, not tons of cash kind of buyers. So they were a little nervous about that. My clients were getting nervous, and I'm like, you know what? I'll just buy it. I know you guys need to move. I'll just buy it. It's fine. And I'll rent it out. And so I bought this house for $50,000. Obviously, this is back in the crash time. Who gets a house for $50,000 anymore? And I mean, I cash flow. I think my payment on that is like $400 or $500, and I rent it for $1,200. So those are the ones you're gonna get all day long. That's really good for a single family. Oh yeah, I have a couple questions. And we will get to how do you screen for good tenants. We will definitely get to more of the management side of things. So maybe I'll pick up the pace a little bit here and jump onto that, because I don't want to not get to that. And the annual management fee, it can vary. Each company kind of does their thing, but what I've seen is kind of like an average is 10% of monthly rents to kind of cover their time of collecting rents. And if they do need to, it does not include repairs at all. But it does include just their time in managing it. If there's a eviction that needs to happen, they send out the 30-day notice, that kind of thing. And then to place a new tenant, about 50% of the first month's rent. And again, that can vary. So that's how management fees tend to be figured out. So for taxes, I'll just kind of quick gloss over. I will stay on the call afterwards if somebody has questions, but I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about management. But I do want to make you aware of some of the tax advantages. 1031 exchange is pretty amazing. If you have made money and you don't want to pay taxes on it, you basically defer that gain into your next property. The trick is you have to roll all of the cash into the new property. You have to structure it so you know it's a 1031 going into it. You have to use a third-party intermediary. So that's one thing. So there's a lot of rules in that. Again, I'll answer questions if you have them. Self-directed IRAs are pretty awesome. You can use IRA money as your to buy investment property. The downside of that is it's really hard to use mortgage financing. There's a lot of ways where it's easy to screw up a self-directed IRA with debt. So I try to really, really avoid it. It's hard to pull off successfully. But if you have some money in an IRA and you need to pick up the pace on what you're making on it, you can definitely use that. Another thing, and I'm going to do once my CPA isn't so overwhelmed, I'm going to do a webinar on this topic. So I'm just going to bring it up to you and then not tell you much about it, unfortunately, but stay tuned, I guess. There are a thing right now that's called opportunity zones that I'm really excited about. Certain parts of the city, and I'm going to make a note to post this on Clarity Conversations too about opportunity zones. Certain parts of the city are considered these opportunity zones. And if you buy something in there, you never, ever, ever pay capital gains on it, ever. You have to hold it for 10 years. So that's the caveat, because that's what they're trying to do, is increase long-term investment into these neighborhoods. But if you hold the property for 10 years, any money you made on it, you don't pay taxes on. And it functions like a 1031. If you sell something somewhere else and invest all of that money into the opportunity zone, then whatever gain you have is deferred into this new property. And then as long as you hold that new one for 10 years, you don't pay tax on any of it. Like, that's amazing. Missy asks, how can you roll 1031 into 2 or 3 properties if you have free and clear? Yeah, you can. You just have to do it within the time frame. You have to identify within 45 days and 180 days to close, but it doesn't have to just be one. I had a client that sold one out in California and then bought 3 over here. And we were definitely able to do that. You just got to be on it. The lender didn't like us very much because it was tricky for him to do that many at a time, but it worked out great. Now, lending is a little bit different. I do want to touch on that, and then we'll get into management. Down payment, like I mentioned, tends to be a little bit higher. Now, a great way around this is owner occupy. Any person that I know that, especially if you don't have kids yet, buy a duplex, for crying out loud, and then never sell it. You only have to live there for, I don't know, 6 months or a year, so that it's not mortgage fraud, that you said you were going to owner occupy and you actually didn't. Buy a duplex, live in half, be almost free because your tenant's making your payment for you, and then someday move out and you still have this duplex and they don't make you refi because you moved out. Go buy another one. Heck, just do that like every 6 or 9 or every 12 months. Just go buy another one. Just move. Anyway, I get excited about that. It's harder to do once you have kids. I understand that, but my word. Oh, look, Missy says she did that. So good. So hopefully you don't have any regrets, right? Now, especially it's good to know this when you're serving clients. Typically on an investment property, you can't have seller concessions more than 2%. So I know more typically a conventional loan is 3% if you're owner occupying, but for investment property, it's only 2%. So it's really good to know that. You can use rent in your ratios to help you qualify for this new property if you have management experience. If this is your first one, not so much. And they don't count it at 100%. They typically count it at 70%. And for good reason. As we've mentioned, there's expenses that go along with running these things. So just so you know that. Okay. Property management. And I know I have some property experienced people here. So this is where I might ask, I'll be hoping that some of you will chime in here and there. But one thing that I would say, just as like an introductory remark, is join the RPOA, the Rental Property Owners Association. It's rpoaonline.org. They are a really great resource. They have all the forms. They know how to do all this stuff. Like the very first eviction that I ever had to do, I just kind of camped out in their office and said, please help me. And they filled out the forms for me. And they just know there is a decent amount of law that you need to know. And the only way to learn it is to just get in there. But the RPOA knows a lot of this stuff, and they are great guides. I had one time, what I found out is that you aren't able to evict active military. And I had a gal who was in the process of divorcing an active military personnel. So he did not want to use his housing allowance on her because it wasn't a good breakup. But she was still technically his dependent because they weren't divorced. And so I learned something really the hard way, but RPOA knew all about it. I was able to evict her, but it took a really long time. So, and that would be maybe my second point when your tenant, that'll maybe lead me into tenant screening. She had all kinds of red flags that I totally ignored because I wanted to support our military. So the lesson that I learned there is you have I mean, it's really easy to want to be, and this is, I would, hopefully you guys will chime in here with some of your own stories, but what I've learned, like as I go back to manage my own properties now compared to when I did it before, I've kind of learned, I'm trying to think of a good way to say it, that like I have a sob story too, meaning I have obligations of my own. So when somebody comes to me and says, I'm living in a shelter, I can't get out of this. Like when they start with a sob story because they want you to overlook, they want you to overlook something, that is a huge red flag to me. Versus back in the day, I used to say, oh my word, I can help her. I'd like, my heart goes out to them big time, right? Like for somebody to have been in an abusive relationship and now I can help them get their kids out of the homeless shelter that they've been in because her husband was abusive. Like that's an awful story and I could help. But those kinds of people and not always, that's a terrible example, but I don't want to be evicting that sob story later. And often when they're asking for allowances, there's a reason. Dawn, I know you're on here and you have a lot of experience. Tell me what lessons you've learned about tenant screening and what's your process? Oh, can I hear? I'll unmute you.
Yeah.
Oh, you got it.
Lessons that I've had to learn hard is to screen. It's a business decision when we take on a new tenant, not a personal one. I donate, volunteer, give in lots of different ways. And some of that can be reflected in our investment properties. However, it is a business. It's not my charity. It's our retirement. And so I have had to evict a lot of people over the years because I did not used to screen as well as I do now. And it's easy. And that's another benefit of RPOA is they do screening for pretty inexpensively. I think it's about $20 a person. And the tenant pays that. I'm sorry?
What's your screening process? Like you have an application, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And Megan is on here too. She can chime in on this. Megan is much more active in that now. But the application, they've got to come up with, if you can't afford the application fee, you can't afford to live in one of our homes.
Do you do it differently since the city changed? For those that don't know, the city made it to where if you don't rent to them that you have to refund their application fee. Isn't that correct? Like, do you do it differently now since they changed those rules?
We have not had to deal with that since that has changed.
You do have to return it, but you only have to return anything that's above what you use to screen them. So as long as you prove that you spent that $20 on the RPOA background check, you don't have to return it.
Right. We're not charging $75. We're not like some of the bigger apartment complexes have a higher fee. We only charge what it costs us.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I used to, not that we don't want to help people now, but we've sold most of the homes where we had a lot of Section 8 properties. And a lot of folks that were, a lot of our tenants were living a lot closer to the line and were getting assistance. Where the homes that we own now are a lot of those tenants become our buyers as well when they're moving out of the apartment. But screening, our POA. I also look at the dependability of the individual. Do they show up? I'm evaluating. It's kind of like a job interview. I'm evaluating their appearance because they're going to live in our homes. How do they take care of themselves? How do they take care of the car that they're driving? If their car is trashed, there's a greater chance that that could be passed on to our home. We have a strict no smoking policy in our homes. We also are no pets now. And I love pets, but we've taken some steps to protect our properties.
I think something that you've taught me as well is when we first initially talk to somebody, we always say, tell me about yourself, kind of an open-ended question.
Yep.
Because people will give up a lot of information.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Tell me about your situation.
Yeah.
And then they just spill it. So, and that helps us to make a better decision where you can't ask some of these questions. But if you just leave it open-ended, like Megan said, folks that are looking for a place to live will sometimes give me too much information.
Mm-hmm. I think when are you looking to move to is a really good question, because if somebody is urgently looking for something today, there's a story behind that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why are you in this position that you need to have moved last week and you haven't yet? So, and do they have the first month and a full security deposit? By law, we can only charge 1.5 months rent as a security deposit, but if someone is a higher risk for us, do we have a parent cosign? We've had that before. You know, if we've got students or that kind of thing, someone that may have sketchier credit. Our POA does not do credit reports anymore. They do decision reports for the most part. You can get a credit report run, but what they were finding was a lot of people didn't know how to evaluate a credit report versus a decision report. The decision report does not include things like medical bills, because one medical situation can mess you up for life. So they don't include medical bills. I don't know that they include student loans on there, Megan, on the decision reports. Do you know?
I think they do.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I just got my own credit report not too long ago, and they're really difficult to read, especially for someone like myself that's got 45 years of credit. You know, I got a book. So the decision reports are a lot easier and they're cleaner and help us make a decision where there might be some red flags involved.
And not to keep putting you on the spot, you just have your camera on, but if anybody else wants to chime in, tell me about, because the other thing that I want to talk about the management side, because I think that's the thing that keeps people from doing it, is they have all of these apprehensions that they're going to get all these calls in the middle of the night, toilets are going to be overflowing everywhere, and you're going to get a bad one and you just can't get rid of them. So tell me about like the eviction process and how cumbersome is that? What's been your experience with that?
Start early. If someone is being evicted for non-payment of rent on the 2nd of the month, and our leases now say that they need to pay by the 2nd, 2nd or maybe the 3rd. But if we don't have rent, then I give them a call and say, what's up? So that we start this, because it's a 7-day notice and you serve them with that, and serve it rather than waiting, because that's when things start to get behind. Typically when someone gets behind, it's a lot more difficult to catch up. And I've ended up thousands of dollars in the hole, again, because I want to help somebody.
Mhm. They all have a good
But-
story.
Yeah. But that is not the norm. Longport Group's had properties, bought my first duplex in 96. So we've had 24 years of experiences, and 95% of them are positive. The calls in the middle of the night, not so much.
I think some of that is when we do our leases, we tell them our phones are on from
Mhm.
8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Unless it's, a dire emergency, you're probably not going to get a hold of us after 7 o'clock. And most of our tenants respect that. I will say too about the eviction thing, something we have learned from our attorney is for your rents, you are much better off writing in your rent. So like if you want $900 a month for rent, write the rent for $975 or whatever your late fee is, and then tell them or put in the contract as well that they get a discount for paying on or before the 1st, because it's really hard to get a judgment for late fees if you're evicting. Judges will usually forgive those overall, versus if it's just part of your rent, you are more likely to get all of those fees.
That's a good tip. That's really good.
Another thing Megan does is she drops by the houses occasionally, just checking on things, just to be a real presence, since we don't live in any of the properties. But if they're just used to us popping by to grab something, one of the homes we have a storage room in the basement that has our equipment and supplies in it, and we just stop by. So we're out maybe doing a little weeding, so it's not uncommon to see one of us, and we can see how things look around the house, or we're changing furnace filters, or we're doing a little bit of something. If you are self-managing, I don't think I've ever gotten, I've gotten a few evening calls, and yeah, if your furnace goes out in January on a Friday night, we'll get someone in there to fix it. But it's typically we will get the repair or somebody out there within 24 hours. If your house, and I've used that example for my whole life, if your house is on fire, call the fire department.
Right?
Don't call me. I mean, call me to let me know, but they will get a hold of me if they need to. I've never had a 2 a.m. call. And we've had leaky toilets. One time someone did call us to tell us that the people down the street were having a party, a loud party at 2 a.m. Call the police. I can't do anything about that. But Megan, we set that early on, and I don't think that's been an issue for you to get late night calls.
No, recently we got the one about the water leak, but that's an extraordinary thing, right? There's all of a sudden water coming out of their ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of want to find out where it is and how we can stop it
Quickly, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Mostly, they'll text me and they'll know, like, okay, she'll text me back or she won't. But more often than not, I'm getting text messages from somebody like, hey, this is going on, just wanted to let you know. I think the biggest thing is we set a precedence from the beginning. Like, we tell them more than one time how much we care for the houses, and tell them we stop by frequently. We let them know we're going to be a big presence there. So then they know, like, I get text messages sometimes about the silliest things, like, hey, just wanted to let you know this happened, because they just want to make sure I know before I go and knock on their door saying, hey, when did that happen? Or when. So I think the presence of knowing that you would rather have a little bit more communication than less. Like, we tell them, like, if the light bulb's out, change the light bulb. You don't need to tell me you need a new light bulb. But if something's going on, let us know because we want to get it fixed just as much as you do.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and you start with one home typically. If you buy one home, whether it's a single family, a duplex, a fourplex, it's only one home. So there's usually one toilet, one furnace. It's not like you're buying 15 properties at once. So you ease your way into it. And one property is a lot easier to manage. It's really manageable versus, again, 4 or 5. Then thinking about having a property manager or somebody to do some of those things when you have 1 or 2. So
Yeah, I think of it like new parents, how
Mhm.
babies get harder and harder as they get older, but they
Mhm.
kind of just sleep all day when you first have them. I think of it kind of that way. You start with one and you ease into it and you learn the ropes and you lean into people like RPOA and
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. Thank you guys for being willing to share. You have a lot of great I know there's other people that are on here that also have some good experience. Does anybody have, I know I saw one question about what does it cost like to run an application? What it's like $25 or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's 22-ish right now.
And we haven't used it yet, but I have seen, like, I know Zillow, we hate Zillow, but they do have an application process on Zillow where the tenants pay Zillow directly to run their credit, to run their application, and it sends the info to you as the, when you post. I think that takes out some of that as well because they're paying Zillow, they're not paying me for the application fee.
Mm.
So that kind of takes us out of it. We haven't used it yet. I don't know how it works really, but I have seen it.
Well, and what I've heard is that Zillow is going to stop letting us post our rentals for free, that they're going to start charging landlords for that. So I'll be interested to see where that goes. But RPOA has a, I want to say it's called like Access Direct or something like that. I could look, but where it's the same kind of idea. I send them a link, they pay the fee, they get a copy of the report, and so do I.
Okay.
So that's a really good resource. And I know that we're starting to, be at our hour. You've definitely earned your Con Ed. I don't have anything after this, not for a while anyways. So if anybody has more questions, I am happy to hang out and answer all that I can. But if you need to go, I totally understand that because I tell you it's over at 11. But I'm hanging out. If you guys have any more questions, I know especially property management, it's so, and maybe it's one of those things we'll have to try it again. So after you buy one, we'll have to do another one on what else do I need to know. But oh yeah, I don't know if everybody is reading the comments. But, and I don't know Flex City Fitness. I don't know who that is. But Bigger Pockets is a great, Sarah Medina, thank you. Bigger Pockets is a good podcast. Well, books too, but podcast. I have heard of that. I haven't listened to it, but now I will. I'm going to write that down. I've heard of it. Thanks for sharing that. So I guess in close, go ahead. If somebody has a question.
Question for Dawn. You said you have a no pets policy. How do you work around that with emotional support animals and fair housing stuff?
We don't really well. We do work with it. We have
they got us on that one.
Yeah. RPOA does have a document that we give out, and we are allowed to request a letter from a verified source for the emotional support. So we have the opportunity, if we don't have to, if it's just an online website that they got this doctor's note from, we can still dispute that. However, if it is a reputable psychiatrist or whatever that says they need the emotional support, we also require them to prove to us that they have a pet policy, insurance policy for that animal.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, that is the biggest thing right now in fair housing. When we called our POA, they were like, it's new and it's right on, and they referred us to fair housing. And fair housing then gave us the documents that we used for that, because we ran into that a couple of years ago. We accepted the person and then found out that she had an emotional support cat, which I looked for every way out of it. And our attorney's like, no, that's a line that you don't necessarily want to cross.
I think that's the trickiest, because they don't have to tell you they have it. They're not required to even, like, when you're screening them, when you're talking to them.
Because it's not a pet.
It's not a pet. They say it's the same thing as having a wheelchair.
It's a piece of furniture. I'm like, well, a piece of furniture doesn't typically scratch or shed or make noises. So yeah, we got to deal with that one firsthand a couple of years ago, and it worked out fine. She was a great tenant. She was meticulous.
A true service animal a true service animal can be a $20,000 animal, right? So like, they are very trained, very trustworthy. I wouldn't have an issue. It's the people that are going online and getting the quick, I want to keep my pets with me.
Right.
That's where it gets a little.
I want to fly free with my pets kind of thing too. You know, you can go online and get a certificate. So yeah, we have dealt with it, and we did have to, basically, we were kind of cornered into accepting this tenant, and her first cat died, and then she did get another one. And like I said, she took very good care of the animal and the apartment. You would not know that there was a cat there. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and the same tenant too. She when she got the new cat, she did rescue it, and they called me and asked me what our pet policy was, and I said, we have a no pet policy. However, we can't stop somebody from having an emotional support animal, but our policy is we have a no pet policy in our buildings.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And yeah, I see that from Melissa, that a service dog is different than an emotional support animal, and laws are different. Yes, the document we've got, and I've got it saved in here from Fair Housing, explained and broke it down what the different categories are, as far as a service animal and emotional support animal. I can look for that and
Yeah, can you email that to me, and then
yeah,
I'll
it's in here. Like I said, it'll take me a minute. I'm not quite that fast. Yeah, okay, I can't just jump on and.
I
But
can
I
send
will.
it on.
Okay. Yeah, you've got the document, Megan, that it breaks down the differences between the different types of animals.
I think so.
Okay, great, thank you.
But yeah, that definitely is it is a tricky one to navigate.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Oh, the other thing that we do too is, because of that, you are allowed to put in your lease a non-refundable, you can't do a pet fee, but you can do a non-refundable cleaning fee. So if you like, usually when we used to allow pets, we would do a non-refundable pet fee, but we can't do that because it's an emotional support animal, but you can put in a non-refundable cleaning fee. And usually we don't have a cleaning fee because we have their security deposit if we need it. But in the event of them having a pet / emotional support animal, you can do a cleaning fee.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very important that you cannot put it in there as a pet fee, or else they can dispute it.
And there are some responsible pet owners,
Mm-hmm.
and you open up your tenant pool and you can usually get better rent.
hmm
So there's some positives to it, but not always. There's some major negatives. It's a risk. Mm.
Ugh.
So like roommates, basically, it's hard to evict. You can evict, but I'd say it's harder.
Mm. Yeah. Corinne does it now and it's been working great for her. A gal that used to be at Clarity has a single family home, and her tenants / roommates, she's got 2, and they more than make her mortgage payment. So I know that for her has been a really great thing to have.
I do it. David and I have a roommate, and he pays our mortgage. He didn't come here as one of our friends. He's lived here now for 5 years, so we know him well. But he pays our mortgage, and they do count it towards our income because we have receipts of him living here.
That being said, I've had requests from friends or family that, oh, you have an open apartment. My son should really check it out. And I'm like, no, I would rather not. I see that Missy said that too. I've rented to friends and every time it didn't turn out well. So yeah, I try to stay away.
To that effect too, we've had people that have worked for us, cleaning people who moved in one of our apartments, and we had to evict them because they know that we don't smoke in apartments, and they smoked in our apartment. They had to go.
Yeah. So yeah, but like I said, but for every horror story or bad thing, I've got 20 good ones. Said several of our tenants have become our clients when they transition from renting to buying. So,
which is the other opportunity for us realtors. That's like the side benefit to owning rental properties is every now and again you sell them a house.
Yeah, we will be your landlord until you're ready to buy, and then we want to be your realtor.
Yeah, and if you want to break your lease to buy a house.
Oh, we've done that as well. Yeah, that's great.
Although I was told it's a RESPA violation to advertise it that way. You know, like you can break your lease if I'm your realtor and otherwise you can't. Like, doggone it.
Yeah, and we've had it once, and it was a legit situation, and she came to us, she lived at the Atwood House, and she came to us out of a bad marriage. She was recently divorced, and her credit wasn't great. She thought she could buy a house. She couldn't. She was honest with us. We worked with her, and 9 months later, we found her a house, and it was a FSBO. And she loves her house, Well, on her anniversary of when she moves in, she texted me and just said, I can't believe how much you've changed our lives. Megan and I working with her and helping her to rent the apartment and then to buy the house. And those are the good things.
That's the feels.
Yep.
Well, here's what I hope you got out of this. I'll do in summary. And again, if somebody has other questions, please feel free to reach out. But here's what I hope that you come away with. One, I hope that if you're not a landlord yourself already, that you start looking into it right now. Just do it. Stop second guessing it. This is the best time to plant a tree. You know what I mean? Secondly, start promoting this to your database. There's a million different ways to do that. Maybe pick one that comes up that you think would be a great buy and start telling everybody about it. What a great reason to call. Call through your database. I have a great opportunity for you. Even if they're not comfortable being property managers and they're not interested, they'll really appreciate that you're looking out for them and their financial future. And it might get them thinking about it. Maybe they didn't think of themselves as property investors before, but with your guidance, they're willing. So turn on your database. Also, promote this to your first time home buyers. Make them into investors. They literally can live for almost free. Get a duplex, live on one side and rent out the other side. My word. I don't know why everybody doesn't do this, but I feel like I want to do just a seminar just on that. Nobody would come, but they should. They should all come. And the other thing that I would say is lean into people that you know that don't live locally. We have significantly better cash flow than they do in other areas of the country. I have sold quite a few to people that live in California, Colorado, areas like that. Reach out to your friends, family, relatives that are in other areas of the country and tell them about the amazing opportunity that we have here in West Michigan. Every time I go to a conference, I pick up a client because I'm just excited about it. I'm just telling them, hey, Michigan's a great place to invest. And they start looking at it and they're like, yeah, you're right. So be talking to the people that you know that are in other areas. So anyways, I appreciate all of you guys hanging out an extra 20 minutes. I hope that means that you were really getting some good information out of it. So I appreciate that. I hope you found it valuable. We are doing these webinars every Thursday at 10. Next week, we are going to be talking about hiring and working with an assistant. Even if you're not there where you need an assistant now, there are things that you should be doing today to prepare your business for one. So we will be talking about all of that. I hope to see you then. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to me anytime. Join Clarity Conversations. We'll have a lot of resources there, but also Julie@movewithclarity.com is my email. 616-363-7788 is my phone number. Anytime. So again, I appreciate all of you guys being here. And Dawn, special, and Megan, special thank you for you and sharing your expertise with us. It was awesome. Okay. Bye.